Thank you for joining us. Thanks everyone for joining us for this afternoon session. We're going to talk about kind of fundraising and the entrepreneur journey with some of the very best people in the state to talk to about this. So I've got Marco Rubin, Lane Carasik, Robert Brookes, and Sean Mallon with me today. So 3 of the 4 are with VIPC, and 1 is not, and we're not going to tell you which one. So, Sean, do you still want to kind of go through slides first, or do we want to start with Lane introducing himself?
Yeah, why don't we start with
Can you
Lane,
do that?
and then we can kind of introduce our roles as we roll through.
All right, sounds good. Do you get to be the first to introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah. So, howdy everyone. I'm Dr. Lane Carasik. I'm an assistant professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in mechanical and nuclear engineering. Before joining VCU in August 2018, I worked at Ultrasafe Nuclear Corporation, which I worked on the space contracting side of it. It's now called USNC Tech. And we did work directly for NASA. We were a true startup. There was 8 or 9 of us. There was the good times and the bad times for the year that I was there. Before that, I worked for a company called Kairos Power, which I was employee number 13, and they're now up to 200 or 300 employees in multiple states that they span. And that was straight out of grad school. I've also worked for Westinghouse Electric Company, the nuclear company, Tennessee Valley Authority, a couple different national labs. I consult a lot with a lot of companies nowadays, and we even do work that they'll talk about with programs called SBIRs or STTRs, as well as other industrial-led funding that we help them from the university perspective. So happy to give my perspective.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate it. Marco, do you want to jump in next? I guess we'll start with the big money first.
Big money.
The big money. You're the big money. So
All right.
Well, actually, can we
you want to go reverse?
can we maybe kind of just do it in the thing? Because what we
Yes.
found is sometimes when you start with the big money, the little money is like, they don't really.
Oh, there you go.
So we start with the little
Go
money.
right.
Is that
Yeah.
right, Adam? Yeah, let me
Yeah.
get my microphone back in. Is that right, Mark? I didn't mean
Please,
to steal your
absolutely.
thunder. I really
Right.
thought you were going to be a little later than you were.
Yeah.
So I had it all planned
thought
so
you
that
were
you
gonna
could
be the grand
gracefully roll in.
That's
Marco
right. I'd be the guy in the back of the
he's
room.
broke a lot of laws to get here now. So VIPC is has been around in different forms and in different names for about 30 years. And up until 2 years ago, it was called the Center for Innovative Technology. And VIPC, Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation. And we'll go through our things. But basically, you can think about us as kind of being a life cycle funding program for Virginia-based startups. So we have a group that we're not really going to talk about too much today is strategic initiatives. This is kind of our group that looks out over the technology horizon to see kind of what's new and exciting, what's coming down the pike, and really works a lot with the the legislative and governor's office and things like that to say, what do we need to start doing now so that Virginia is well positioned in X, Y, or Z growth industry down the road. So that's that. We have one of our colleagues who's not here today is Conway Haskins, runs Entrepreneurial Ecosystems, and this is really a relatively new program for us where we're not investing directly in startups. We're investing in and providing funding to organizations in all the regions. DEIC is a good example that are actually getting up every day and obsessing over making sure that entrepreneurs have resources and support and mentorship and things along those lines. And then commercialization and investments is what we're going to go in here. In our world, commercialization basically equals grants, and investments equals equity investments. So if we want, we can get into the finer details of the differences between that during our Q&A. But anyway, so that's kind of, and this is a circle because we all kind of work together and we bounce referrals back and forth to each other, and we work a lot with the ecosystem as well. Most of our deal flow actually comes from organizations like DEIC and Lighthouse Labs and others around the state. So this summarizes Commonwealth Commercialization Fund is our grant program. companies can apply for up to $75,000 at a time. Do we have any academics in the room with us today? All right, besides this guy. No.
I work at VCU.
Okay, so the 75K is accurate for everybody except for academics, right? That we would start at 75K, and they have an opportunity to come back for up to 150K, and then up to so it's kind of like an SBIR that gets a little bit bigger over time. Whereas if you're a private sector company, it's 75K, and if you decide to come back, if you crush your milestones and you can come back, well, you can apply. Well, you can get up to 3 grants.
Actually, because this has confused me before, can you clarify academic? Is it professor? Is it researcher? Is it employee?
It's anything that takes place within the walls of the university.
Okay.
And there is no, there's generally not yet a company that has been established, right? So if you go out and, as a faculty member, you might have an LLC that you set up just for consulting gigs and stuff like that. That doesn't count. If you're doing the preponderance of your work in the lab, and you're using graduate students and things like that, that would flow through. And in fact, for those grants, the applicant is VCU, right? So you work through your sponsored programs office, and they take a piece of the action, and as you do with a lot of grants. And then we say higher ed is one category, and then private sector. And private sector is pretty much everybody else. And probably 80% of the grants that we make are to private sector companies. Not because we don't have a line that we draw. It's just that that's kind of where the deal flow comes from. Okay.
That makes sense.
Can we talk about the process for that?
We get into that a little bit later. Marco, you want to just high level on VVP, because you've got some slides a little bit later on.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a senior investment director with Virginia Venture Partners. We're the equity arm of VIPC. We make direct investment ownership positions into companies with the expectation of return. As to Sean's point, we're coupled in that loop because we too are part of this kind of food chain. And it's, more to the point, at the end of the day, we're here not just to generate pure returns, but we're really trying to help stimulate the ecosystem, and that means finding entrepreneurs that are venturable, that are looking to go down that classic venture capital path. Sean and I first met, 20 years ago as then young VCs, and we have that in our DNA. And so this is to say, we're not pure green eye shade guys. I think to be successful in this job, you have to have a sense of mission. So to do that, we make investments ranging from 25K to as large as $1 million. So think of us as kind of the first professional organized investor before you go on to the larger sums of money. Yeah, and so to get to the point, we have an energy fund, a life sciences fund, an aerospace, and a software fund.
We'll come to that a little
Terrific.
later. And then Rob is here. Rob, again, you got a whole slide later.
I got a whole slide. But yeah, so I work on supporting Virginia-based companies in their effort to learn about, understand, and hopefully apply for the federal SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, and its sister program, STTR, Small Business Technology Transfer, or as they call it in the DoD, SBIR and SITR, but the other agencies don't call it that. So, so we try to teach companies how to go through the process. My process is typically, trying to help educate companies, help build that foundation of knowledge so that you could, kind of teach you how to fish, right? Give them a fish or teach them how to fish. And so that you can learn and apply these skills to other grants you might be writing, other even venture capital, because not every SBIR, you're right, is going to be winner. But oftentimes I tell people that's sometimes the first time you put all your stuff down in paper, your budget, your commercialization, why people would want it, who would want it, how much would they want, what would you pay for it, what would you spend on it, how much is it going to, and who's on the team. And a lot of times it's the first time. So SBIR is, I get a little, I don't really have a slide about what they are, but they're providing anywhere between $150,000 up to $1 to $1.5 million over about a 3-year span. There's a phase 1, there's a feasibility study, my idea, my wild, wacky idea. I don't know, it's supposed to be the highest risk money really a company gets. At the same time, the government put together to say, hey, you can talk about some wild, wacky idea, but at the same breath, you have to talk about who wants it, where the customer would be, how you would sell it. So to put it end to end, and a lot of technologists, don't understand how to do that. So the SBIR program makes them think about market, make them think about customers, pricing, a value proposition, what the gap in technology that exists now compared to what you're proposing, and is that big enough of interest to the agency that's funding it? 11 agencies fund it, over $4 billion annually now across 11 agencies. DoD is the big kahuna with over about $2 billion. NIH has about $1 billion. Energy's got about $500 million. They got $400 million or so. NASA 300 or so. NSF about 230. And then all the other ones are kind of bulked in: transportation, USDA, EPA. Who am I missing here? Commerce, NIST, and NOAA.
I don't know if you were going to bring up
Education.
the ARPAs or DARPAs. I think those are good to mention too, because they're kind of like the next stage after those, but could even be at the same time.
Yeah. So there's other federal funding out there that DARPA is one of the DoD Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and then ARPA-E, ARPA Energy, and they kind of have their own SBIR. These are usually larger, long range, large challenges that the actual time frame for commercialization is almost unknown because the projects are so hard, and depending on what agency it is. But they have SBIRs in that too. And I always tell people, if you look at DoD, all these guys have a different timeline and a different level of risk. If you look at DoD, you got the Army, Navy, Air Force, you got special operations, you got DARPA. So SOCOM, special operations, wants things quick. They want to do things more rapidly, try to get in the hands of their fighters that are out there doing special stuff. DARPA is a flip side, total opposite of like, we don't know who might even want this in the DoD. DARPA doesn't buy anything. They do research, but the Army would buy it, Navy would buy it, Air Force would buy it down the road, maybe. So they fund things that are going to be kind of long, what they call DARPA hard, long range, and maybe it'll happen. Maybe we'll figure it out after we get you money and start developing it. So that's the kind of flavor. All agencies aren't the same. It's all in one program called SBIR or STTR. STTR requires a small business to collaborate with a nonprofit research institution or university. Could be a federally funded lab. They have to, whereas SBIR allows it, STTR requires it, and that's there's different percentages and how much you can outsource, and there's different rules for the primary investigator with SBIR and STTR. But we won't go into that. But we'll leave it at that. But it's probably the most successful small business program the government ever created. It's over some estimates it's about 25% of all seed funding in America is $4 billion. That's a B with a B, right? So that's a lot of money. So if you're not in it, it's not for everybody. It's for early stage, high risk, high payoff. So if you already built it and you want to develop your app in 3 weeks, great. Investors might even have interest in that, but it's not an SBIR most likely. It could be the foundational part of learning more about customers and what the actual big problem is. And you're going to, and the agencies have different amount of money they provide. Kind of the little agencies have smaller budgets, so they have smaller awards. Bigger agencies have larger awards.
And you may get into this later too, but that NSF, the National Science Foundation, has a broader aperture, if you will, right? So you get Army and DoD is saying we need a specific new kind of screw to make sure that this piece of armament stays attached.
Yeah,
Whereas NSF.
Yeah, I tell people there's two kinds of agencies. There's the agency that wants to buy it. They have the problem. They want to be the user. And they're typically going to be like contracts. They want to buy it, and they write the problem, and you think you have an idea that would be a unique approach, and you apply. Flip side is like the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and the National Science Foundation, where they list some things like, we want things in advanced manufacturing. Well, what do you want? You tell me, what's the problem you see out in the real world of advanced manufacturing? So you have to then explain, put out there your idea of a solution that's going to, fit the scope of a project, or the $275,000 now to NSF. So you can't be proposing to create, the moon. And so you're proposing the idea, the topic, basically. So generally, the agencies that let you promote your idea, they're going to have they want a higher risk. They want a larger, as NSF would call it, a leapfrog technology, evolutionary, not just revolutionary, not just evolutionary, game changing, paradigm shifting. So they want you to be really putting out something really hard. That's the NSF. They're probably the largest leap in technology agency they want to fund. NIH is a little bit different. They fund by institute. And so if you can find something that is meaningful for one specific institute, National Institute of Mental Health or National Cancer Institute, they know that stuff. NSF funds anything almost. Medical stuff. They're not going to develop drugs necessarily, most likely, but so you have to kind of figure out where your risk is, how far along your product is developed, or your idea, or your prototypes, or your MVP, or just an idea, and we can find a place for you, most likely.
I did want to ask, have you? Was one of the companies you worked on? Have you experienced the SBIR process at a startup?
Yeah. So actually, the company I worked with that was a space contractor, I was funded on this phase 2 SBIR from NASA. And it was I think it was an $800K grant that it was paying for me and another employee I was only there for a year, so I was on the second year. And then I believe right after I left, because they knew I was coming here before they even hired me, they got the phase 3 or the phase 2X, which is NASA is they're kind of now buying the product as opposed to just saying, we're paying you a research grant to develop this activity.
Yeah, SBIRs are funded in phases. Phase 1 and phase 2 is the actual set aside. The SBA administers a program, but it's a reauthorized, so it's a law. Agencies over a certain amount of extramural R&D budget have to, by law, have these programs. The top 5 agencies have budgets that require them to have the STTR. So all the agencies don't have the STTR, but they are just about 3.2% set aside of their extramural money they spend outside their agency on research has to go in this program. So 3.2% is why, with budgets increase everywhere, that budget ticks up. That's why it's $4 billion now.
And on the VCU side, I have served as the co-PI for it, but as the lead person at VCU for 2 different phase 1s. At each year, I usually, with either 1 or 2 companies, usually have at least 1 phase 1 in that my group is on the hook to do work for them. Mostly Department of Energy. I've submitted 1 and NASA 1, but it really depends on our work. But it's good. It's really good stuff to get.
So under what entity do you submit?
So it's usually the company leading it.
The company that's someone that's like you're partnered with. They're basically leveraging you and your lab to get the project done.
Yeah. So they'll usually do either testing with us, or we'll do simulations, or even have me as just like a technical expert, because having some of the background in those areas does help out a lot. I've had some conversations with the companies where it's like, oh, you may know this. And they're like, no, we have no idea. So even having that background can be head and shoulders. And I mean, got to have the money come from somewhere.
Yeah, so. I'll even say that, when a good SBIR, the average size company getting these is about 10 employees. When anybody under 500 employees is technically eligible. But they're usually pretty small. And the goal, they allow you to outsource percentages primarily because most small businesses don't have all the expertise in lab space and facilities and even know-how in the company. So you're trying to propose that you are one of the leading experts maybe on this, at least in the country, of what you're proposing. I mean, if you're not, smart and doing what you're doing, you shouldn't be proposing new innovation stuff. So think about using that amount to collaborate with a university, find the expertise, and put together an advisory board. I don't have one. We'll get an advisor, a key advisory. So you can have these Rolodexes that people, they want to trust you. They want to trust they're giving you the money. And I would say similar to all of our other funds that we want to know, what else do you have? What do you that's just sort of the, you can't possibly have everything most likely as a small business in-house. So they do allow you to outsource, and I know you said you've got a current project you're funded with another, or you're applying or something for an STTR, and it's great. I mean, Virginia ranks third in the country in SBIRs and STTR, about 300 and some million a year coming into the state. So
We want to get that higher. We actually have an incoming RPE project that is with a company called New Vision Engineering. They're actually based in North Carolina, but we're the only academic partner, and that is 4.7 million total. VCU is getting about 400K of that split over 3 years. And that company's not that large. That company's only about 20 people in the United States. So, and they're interested in crazy ideas, like you said, but are the longer lead ones. So I would also encourage looking at the ARPAs, because particularly the new climate one, if that one comes through, any of those, like, jump after it. It's worth trying to do the paperwork.
When they do the open ARPA E is every 3 years, I think.
No, I think they do open every year now.
Do they really? Do
But
they
they've got so many programs. Like,
That's the
so
thing.
if you know anything about barges, for instance, apparently there's a program manager at RPE that wants to fund making barges cleaner. like on top of the nuclear energy ones, on top of the wind, solar, anything like cars, like
Right.
there is likely a program that will come through soon, or an open or something analogous to it. It is worth keeping track of it and meet the program managers.
That's always good advice, I think, to know the program managers. Let me just toggle through these real quick. Just want to point out with the CCF program, in fact, this goes over to VVP as well. We abide by the same industry list. But if you can think of an industry that's kind of tech or life sciences related that's not on here, let me know. Or that can't be. We generally don't find ourselves saying no to people because they can't find an industry that fits. Just saying. And in the theme of this conference, here's a handful of. We've been very active since July 1. We've made 88 grant awards. You can maybe recognize some logos, but on the left side are specifically companies that you guys probably know, Braden and Adam, in the energy and advanced manufacturing space. All right. Someone asked about process. So it's not identical, but similar between our programs. We have an online application form. Once that's submitted, and in our case, there's a budget that comes with it. I think there's something like that for you guys too. We look at it, do an initial review to make sure that it meets, our basic compliance, right? You need to be based in Virginia. You need to have, you need to be in one of those industries that I just showed you a few minutes ago. So it's not a particularly high hoop if you're here. And then we go into the team review, and again, it's very similar across our two teams. If we like you, we do an initial review. If we don't like you, we'll say no, because there's either no business there, or it just doesn't line up. But if we like you, we will. The tendency is, let's just bring them in and have a pitch. So we get to do Shark Tank. Are you guys familiar with the Shark Tank show? We do that really every week. We didn't do it this week because of other conflicts, but we do that every week. And then coming out of those meetings, we basically will either advance someone into what we call a due diligence process or not, based on how well they do at that point. And then due diligence here in the upper right is, it can take a lot of different forms, but normally what it does, it takes the forms of us picking up the phone and calling people whose names we heard during the pitch. Like, who are you working with? Well, we're working with Dominion Energy. Right. So we go back and say, give us the name of the person at Dominion Energy that you're working with. We want to talk to them. Well, I mean, what was it? I mean, I just thought that about it. So, but then we call them. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually someone that they've cultivated a very good relationship with and that understands their value proposition and can support what they're doing. And occasionally we'll do a little bit of sleuthing on our own and say, they didn't give me this name, but I can see on their LinkedIn profile that they're connected with a friend of mine. I'm going to call the friend of mine and see what they think of them, right? A lot of what we do is not about like, how great is your business idea? It's about how great are the people that are going to build this into a real business. And so we look at, just high ethical behavior. We look for people that shoot straight and that that are serious. That when you talk to them, you can tell that they get up every morning and they roll up their sleeves and they go to work. Right? It's not about someone else doing the work for them. These are founders, right? And there's a certain cut of the cloth that we look for in that regard. And then we have internally, but it rolls all the way up to our CEO in terms of a final sign off before we actually issue a grant. And then Marco, I'll hand it off to you. This is your VVP slide. You've covered some of this already, but you may want to hit on a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. This is the point where I was supposed to walk in late, right?
Yes.
With all of the flash pots and
Yeah, dramatically.
the Gary Glitter music in the backdrop, and said, "Yeah, here he is." And, yeah, slow-mo, and then I'm here to disappoint. No, so about me, I'm part of an organization that started the equity side right about exactly 17 years ago. And this was just a brand new de novo fund operation. And imagine you're a first-time fund operation, you set up shop, and first thing people say is, "Who the heck are you?" And then the second thing you start getting is basically the worst of the worst, meaning no one really knows who you are, and people who have shopped their last deal, et cetera. And the point of the story is really not to be funny. The real point of the story is nobody knows who you are. You have to build your track record and your reputation. So fast forward, what Sean showed up here is kind of 17 years later, the story, and Sean was instrumental in this as well. He was leading the equity investment team and then left and came back and is leading the grant side. But look how it's evolved from nothing to this, $100 million assets under management.
And the next slide is all of the outcomes. You want me to go to that?
Yeah, because this is just the family of vehicles. And there may be just one point worth calling out. The reason I just came from our inaugural launch of what's called fund of funds management, where deploying a substantial amount of money from U.S. Treasury, as are other states and areas. But basically, it's a $1.5 billion nationwide program, of which the Commonwealth of Virginia has $220 million. So net out, this is a game changer for the Commonwealth. And the intention of this money is, we've been doing direct investments for 17 years. This is the next level of kind of investment consciousness. Now we're picking other fund managers. How many VCs do you know who are in Virginia? Exactly. Not much. We're a bit of a flyover state, to be kind of pretty critical. And we have some great angel groups, different sorts of organizations, but we don't really have an established venture ecosystem here serving Virginia. The aim of this program, if you do it correctly after a 10-year life, is to establish an ecosystem of investors that will be able to do kind of later stage stuff where there's currently a huge gap now. So we're just now starting that. Be on the lookout if you have fund-to-fund folks, fund managers who are interested. There's going to be an RFP on April 3rd. It's going to come out. So if that holds your interest, let me know. I'd be glad to talk to you more about it. Looks like you were about to ask a question, Lane, or make a comment.
I was just going to make a comment. So one of the biggest problems we have is the PhD students, when they get their PhDs and their doctors or their masters, they don't have a place to go in Virginia. So they usually have to leave the state. So something like this is going to lead to a lot of follow-on effects of they get to stay here or other parts of Virginia.
And Rob made a point, and to your point about, there's this, we're the third largest state, is that right, in terms of SBIR allocation? And why is it that we don't have a commercial counterpart to that? And to your point, we have this academic chops here. Yeah. This is like a missing ingredient. And so if we do this right, and it's a big question, if we do this right, 10 years from now, we'll be helping to keep those people in Virginia. That's part of the intention here. Does that make sense? So yeah, if you want
to respond to Lane a little bit more into all of the academics that are lined up in the back of the room there. Yep. We have, through the Commonwealth Commercialization Fund, so I mentioned that we have the private sector and then the higher ed piece. So the main kind of blocking and tackling on higher ed is grants to research teams and things like that. But we have also rolled out a program within CCF that supports postdoc fellowships. Right. So if you have someone that graduates with a PhD and they've been working with you on something that is really big, and they're not going to get a 10-year position somewhere for whatever reason, this would allow them, this would actually pay their bill for up to 24 months after they graduate, just to pursue the business opportunity, right? They could it
Yeah.
would still be within the university, right? And they'd still have, OSP, but it would be basically them getting ready to spin out a company.
Oh yeah, and I can immediately see the benefits of that.
Well, and it keeps them in Virginia, to your point
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I want some of my soon-to-be former students to end up founding a new nuclear company here, right? Like, or someone else in Richmond specifically, just so they don't have to go far.
Well, let's talk a little bit later because you could be an early use case for this new
Yeah,
credit.
Sean, I don't want to jump ahead. Obviously, we have a lot of hands raised in the audience,
Yes.
but one question I have for you all is how, I know the growth of CCF particularly has been recent and rapid. But how do you all think about telling this story outside of Virginia, right? When I step outside of Virginia, when I'm at a utility conference like the other week, and I'm talking to startups from other places, who are hitting seed stage or are pre-seed stage, so one of the first things I'm asking them is, well, what is your state doing for you? And they either don't know or they know, and the answer is nothing. And I'm constantly saying to people like, well, if you were in Virginia, here's what I could help you with. But I don't know. I feel like it should be a very attractive part of our proposition as a state, but I don't know how well it's known outside of our borders.
I mean, my thoughts, and it's not a very satisfying answer for me, is that it is relatively unique. In fact, one of our colleagues just got back from a national conference, and her feedback was none of these companies or none of these states, even the ones that are kind of held out as being kind of very entrepreneur friendly, have the level of state funding support for startups. So we have that, and I think that's part one.
Mm-hmm.
And then part two is we've always been in the business, I would argue, of kind of growing Virginia businesses from within.
Right.
So unlike our counterparts at the Virginia Economic Development Partnership that are out, trying to bring Amazon in and Nestle and Lego and stuff like that, I guess we just don't have the bandwidth to do that, right? We're not set up to go to Silicon Valley and hand out flyers at the at the bus stop or whatever it is, saying come to Virginia. But people that know, and the people that are here are able to benefit quite a lot. So that's, like I said, not a satisfying answer, but we do try to get the word out. And in fact, we're talking about even sponsoring a study that would basically compare the states.
Right. I mean, it is part of our working thesis. I think all of our working thesis is that there are a lot of people already in the state who should be starting businesses that we then support. But I just know from conversations, right, even across the border, we work with a lot of people in North Carolina. North Carolina doesn't do this. So it feels like as we get further along, as you're unleashing this new round of capital, there's maybe more opportunity to say, like, this is a place to come do business for this reason.
Yeah, and you hear all sorts of surveys. Virginia is a very business-friendly kind of state.
Right.
I believe we have all of the ingredients here at Less Capital. I mean, we have the intellectual capital, we have sort of the regulatory mindset, we have the academic infrastructure, we have research institutions that are first tier. And, to Rob's point, we have this proximity to the federal spigot. I mean, we got so many natural advantages, and quite frankly, nuclear is a super interesting, I think, piece of space to be grabbed. That to me is a jump ball that no one, I think, can lay claim to. I think we have some unique assets. So this is to say, I think our messaging could be a lot better. I guess to Sean's point, we don't have recruitment vehicles designed to actively go out and hunt for companies that, hearing your story about North Carolina, I get it. If you're an RTP, there's a nucleus there, but it sort of bothers me that that organization isn't co-located with you guys. And I recognize they have a business thesis, but that's a perfect example of, hey, if we had a pot of money or two or three, would they be enticed, consider relocating and make this their go-to place? I think it could help quite a bit.
Just to add to that, that's actually been something that when I go to conferences myself, on the more technical side, I meet with a lot of the companies that have some investment in going to these meetings. And I say to them, hey, Richmond is a really good city to establish. It's got a pretty good area for people to live in, just to start making the next part of their lives. But also we have VCU here. We don't have Virginia Tech too far away, or UVA too far away, or the other higher ed institutions here. And you can get to DC in 2 hours, right? So not just the funding, but highlighting the fact that we have relatively cheap cost of living compared to other places, and we do have just about everything else we need, even some of the manufacturing that is really starting to develop. And I think highlighting that, and I'm trying to convince one of the companies, like, add Richmond to your study for where you want to move your headquarters to.
Absolutely.
You're driving the house appreciation in the city.
Yeah.
And the beer and the food are good here too.
Yeah, we got that. So I don't want to take it off of the funding piece too much, but it is something that I wonder about when it
Sean,
comes
do you
up.
want me to drive this real fast? So,
Yeah.
So this is a series of interrelationships to show what is kind of cause and effect here a little bit. So direct investment, meaning companies put directly into the Virginia-based startups. The number in the center, the 275, are portfolio companies since inception of the organization doing live equity investments. Here's kind of my view, kind of an interesting number at the top on the upper right. We've attracted, for every dollar we invest, we on average get a co-investment by the capital marketplace of about 43. The number varies. We're constantly adjusting this number, but about 43, 44 to 1. So for every dollar we write into a company, it attracts it. That's basically the marketplace voting with its checkbook. They're basically saying, if we like the deal, we'll put a lot in. If we don't like the deal, crickets, and that's not a good place. We've had a pretty good track record. It's taken 17 years, but it also, Lane, to your earlier point, I think one of the reasons is I think there's selection that's improved, but I think also what's happened is people are realizing Virginia is a relatively good value for deals. Again, this high cost of living in Silicon Valley and Boston, they're starting to become an issue with the capital markets. One of the things I'm seeing that is also kind of going to drive democratization is that institutional sources of capital are saying, hey guys, enough of the kind of control in a couple, 2, 3 capital markets. And oh, by the way, enough of the control in a handful of very high-end fund managers. What about diversity? What about geographic distribution? So I'm deeply involved in the indirect side, so I expect these numbers to go up across the board. But look at that, 9,600 jobs, total jobs directly and indirectly attributable to this program. And these are high-value jobs. They're tied to tech companies. Sometimes they're metal bending, but this is where it's at. 600. I think that number is probably understated. I think we're closer to 900 patents granted. We've generated almost. And by the way, I need to back up. That number looks probably pretty big. 86 million in returns, realized and unrealized. I would submit to you, because of our mission role and where we have to stop, we take on a lot of risk at the very early stage, and because we are a small dollar investment in the grander scheme of things, we don't go all the way in. And Sean's lived this as a VC. What do you do as a venture capitalist? You look for all of the de-risking to the point where you see the handful that survive, and you want to place your bets.
Yep.
That's what VCs do. We don't get to play in that game all the time. So we take a lot of the risk, and we often don't get to participate. And we've kind of gone through these what ifs that said, if we didn't have that constraint, it could be a much bigger number. But that's okay. We're surrendering economics to other people. And this is to say, I think there's a lot more capacity here in the Commonwealth to do this. And I think, again, we're kind of this public-private animal, but imagine private fund managers 10 years from now, pick a number, 5, 10 new managers who didn't exist before, right here serving that, back in your lab with that entrepreneur who's no longer in North Carolina is co-located with you guys. That's exciting. And then take that times 10. I'm hoping to see that's what happens here in Virginia.
Well, and the other thing about on the indirect strategy and new funds is you need to have kind of the limited partners in this whole thing, right? The insurance companies and the pension funds and things like
Right.
that are very risk averse. I mean, they're managing retirees' money. They don't want to lose it. So it's really important that new fund managers, right? Say young, they don't have to be young, but emerging fund managers have almost a little bit of an early, luck, right? To say, I'm going to give you money. And we have the opportunity there to pick some really smart people that haven't necessarily proven themselves at that level yet, but we think, what? They're smart. They're saying the right things. 5, 6, 7 years from now, when they're raising their second fund or their third fund, they'll be able to say, look, I've got a track record of success. Here are the companies. If every dollar that I've put in, companies have gone on to raise $10 or $20 or whatever it is. And it gives you a lot of credibility. And it's even, any one of us going to a big investor, they'd be like, yeah, but it's just you, right? I mean,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's well said.
So anyway, just thought I'd add that.
But that's kind of the point here. And Sean, you just stimulated a thought here. What's the end game here with entrepreneurs? They exit, they create new wealth, and guess what? They either become repeat entrepreneurs or sometimes they become or angel investors, this flywheel effect. I just have listened through a bunch of fund applications, and I have to say how excited I am to see people who are exited and are taking their entrepreneurial chops and putting it into that first time. They've been a first-time entrepreneur, they were successful, now they're going to be a first-time manager. And I said, man, that's interesting how that works. By the way, somebody skipped me in that process. I'm feeling a little sort of envious, but it's good to know that there's going to be opportunity for people.
Marco, I think it's the age-old thing that the grass really is always greener on the other side. And these poor entrepreneurs that have watched you and me kind of show up at the board meetings and wax philosophic about why they should be doing one thing and not what they're doing.
That's right.
They're like, I want to be able to sit in that chair.
They do. I'll tell you what, when a life sciences entrepreneur has an exit after devoting 10 to 15 years of their life, I am the first person to go to shake their hands because I said, you know what? Not only did you take a monumental risk and create this incredible value, but I've seen a lot of guys like you devote your lives to it and not necessarily be successful. That is just unbelievable mission. Can you imagine that? You take a chunk of your life, 15 years of your workable life, and devote it to all in. That's guts.
Right. With the likelihood that you're going to end up with less than you would have if you just had just a simple administrative job.
That's right. That's better.
But you do it more fun. I mean, life as an entrepreneur is definitely has the highs and lows.
I would not go on the administrative end, so I
One thing I wanted to ask you all, and you've touched on it a little bit, but we have, it's three sort of buckets of funding, right? And I think we've touched on, they kind of come at different phases, but can you talk a little bit more about sort of, there is also overlap, right? So there should be people who are doing CCF at the same time that are working with Robert on, maybe a phase 2, but not a phase 1, and then at some point they should be on Marco's radar. Can you just sort of touch on how the overlap happens and from the entrepreneur's perspective, how they should think about this?
I think it goes a little bit towards what the couple thoughts here. When we make an investment, it's in the company. Right. It could ride along with that company for 10, sometimes years or longer. Yeah. CCF is making grants for a project focus, which is going to be usually 6 months. And then we don't own anything in the company. We're not riding along with them. They can come back and apply again. So sometimes it's, where they are as far as how far along the product is. We're typically going to be investing in not an idea like an SBIR from our investment fund. It's not going to be, I have this wild, wacky idea. Talk to Rob, SBIR. But the CCF can be, so you're usually going to have some sort of customer engagement, at least some beta testing, depending on the product, whether it's hardware, software. Or whereas CCF can be kind of granting in a wider continuum from really early university, that's not even a company, right? So it's a little different thought there. We don't invest in universities from our investment fund. Whereas SBIR is typically pretty early. The CCF grant requires a 1-to-1 match from the small business in kinds, wage salaries, things they're purchasing and doing with it. But an SBIR in hand that they have won could be the qualified match. So you're thinking about where that is. Again, it's usually if you're developing a software for a DoD system on a ship, you've probably got some sort of platform developed already as a company. So that's a little for an NSF SBIR. It might be an idea you threw at the wall, and you've got some basic understanding of what might happen, but you haven't built nothing yet. So it does, depending on a little bit about where you are, product development wise, on where the funding might fit. But we all generally, there's a lot of gray lines between us, and sometimes there's overlap.
There is. It's a really good question. I think the way, at least over the last couple years, that we've kind of, so one of the big changes we made on the CCF side of things, it used to be a one-time per year solicitation deadline, and if you missed the deadline, you had to wait around until the next one. Now we do it on a rolling basis, so people can apply anytime. And I think where we've been trending, and to some extent on purpose, is when VVP, Virginia Venture Partners, is basically acts as a signal to the marketplace of equity investors, angel investors, VCs. When these guys write a check, they're basically saying this company is ready for an equity investment, right? It's basically, and that's, Marco talked about reputation. 17 years ago, you may not have had that power, but now when you put a term sheet down and say, we're going to put in $200,000 or $300,000 towards $1 million round, the rest of that $1 million turns up pretty quick because people, their ears perk up and they're like, oh, this must be ready for an equity investment. CCF, we occasionally, there'll be a project that a funded company is doing. They're like, if we just had $75,000 from you, we could do it this much faster or this much better or whatever, and that's fine. But for the most part, we see ourselves as that earlier stepping stone where these companies are not venture ready, and where completion of a project, or maybe it's 1.5 projects or something like that, all of a sudden would give you something to perk up the ears of an equity investor. Now you've really validated that you've got something and that the market actually wants what you're doing.
Do you have a recent example from VCU College of Engineering? Because I think one or two of my colleagues have a CCF, don't they?
Yes, we've done. I think they were on this slide here. No, these are all private sector companies. But here, certainly, yes. Yeah. So I was just thinking in terms of listing. Mostly what we've been doing is in life sciences with your life science colleagues.
Were you all involved in the growing of like the artificial brain? The one that they were doing? Yeah, that one's really cool.
Yeah. It's a model brain basically, so you can test devices and things like that on it, and it has all kinds of sensors inside that tells you if I was a real brain, this is what I'd be feeling right now. But yeah, absolutely. And the way our channel there is really your technology transfer office, right? But it's also the deans, right? So Dean Barbara Boyan is on our board, and so we're getting tons of stuff, coming from her and from her lab and others as well.
Can I ask you a question about that? That
Sure.
may be a quick question, but may not be.
May not be.
Sorry. The tech transfer offices and the working on this side with the research universities, how much of it is like push versus pull? How much of it is waiting for them to show up to you with ideas versus your team that is already sort of,
No, it's
full
on the
capacity?
higher ed side, it's definitely us calling them and saying, remember that we have this program.
Yes.
So it's, I would say it's less so that way on the private sector side, because
Right.
people they've caught on to
Right.
the availability of this thing. But academics, another thing too, $75,000 when you're going after some kind of big NIH thing for $500,000 doesn't necessarily I'll get to it later.
Yeah.
Plus we got rid of deadlines. Academics love deadlines. And if you don't give them a deadline,
Is that true?
Oh yeah.
if you don't give them a deadline, they're like, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it some other day or something like that. So we're actually thinking about reinstituting deadlines so that our academic partners actually.
Some context to that is when everything is on fire and is due immediately, you just do with the thing that's on the most fire. So for us with rolling deadlines, it's a little bit harder. But particularly with like the 75K or the smaller end, those are really good for seed projects for us. That it's a little bit lower barrier to entry because we're just competing in the state. We're not competing nationally. Because, for instance, I just submitted 2 proposals 2 weeks ago that each are $1 million, but the success rates on those are maybe 5%.
So our success rate on higher ed is about 80% right now, right? Because they don't come out of thin air. They come from people that say, we've been working with this researcher for the last 5 years and they're doing great stuff and they won another proof of concept award or whatever. On the private sector side, it's about 55% over the last. So much higher than, even SBIR and stuff.
I was just going to add one more point on the thesis that we've been talking about today. There's a tie that binds all of our conversations. I feel like I'm missing my alcoholic beverage of choice because I'm about to say deep tech, everybody drink. So deep tech is what binds us. And if you think about what some venture investors do, I kid you not, they look for more capital efficient deals. They don't want to be in a deal that, gee, I've got a deal that might make a 10x return in 3 years that, is this particular marketplace app. Or I can make an investment that could be 15 years into a particular nanomaterial that may or may not work.
Right.
Very, very different. And I had an entrepreneur come over to me because it speaks to how our capital relates. I used to think the word de-risking meant kind of like permanent de-risking. I think de-risking is a pit stop. It's just an opportunity to extinguish the risk, and then you come back around the lab and you found another risk.
Yep.
And it's sometimes it's completely reinvented risk. And an entrepreneur once told me this. He said, he showed me, he said, you guys, he said, you've heard the Valley of Death, right? It's one of another drinking game point, right? So the Valley of Death. The Valley of Death is not a monolithic place. He said, you guys didn't come to us with just one cantina full of water. You came to us like about 6 or 7 times along the way till we got far enough so that the capital markets saw that 3-year return and could play. In other words, if you're an investor, a professional investor, and you're smart about returns, you're going to be looking for how to get your best, quickest, safest return. So if I were on the outside looking into this group, I'd be cherry picking how, Rob and Sean, myself, you, Glenn, all of us have done this. And I'm going to look for the best sweet spot. So, and I'm saying sometimes I have companies that go back to Sean and Rob, recycle, constantly doing laps around and de-risking this because these are dynamic things. And quite frankly, sometimes the market doesn't like the tech. And you got to do it all over again or you wind down the company.
And I would say in the energy space, we're not looking at really short timelines. We're looking usually at longer timelines. I mean, probably for wind and solar and a lot of the other clean energy, you're looking at maybe 5 years for the longer ones. But I mean, nuclear, it could be 20 years.
Yeah.
Fusion, 30, right? So having that ability to
We
de-risk
just did a
is
fusion
important.
deal. Don't tell me it's going to be 30 years.
Well, not 30 years until you get a meaningful, right? But like the actual deployment of the activity.
But we thought about that as we did that deal. We're like, we're some of the longest, the most patient capital that there is, right? In the sense that there's no deadline. You never have to pay us back ever. But also, the old thing is like, fusion's always 30 years away. We're like, well, but this was something that was very specific. And in the course, and I'm sorry, it's a bit of a sidebar, but in the course of our due diligence, the folks that we talked to at like Los Alamos and others that were partnering with them were like, if these guys can actually do what they're doing, someday it'll work in fusion. But in the meantime, there's all kinds of other applications that this technology can be used for that's much more near term.
And Los Alamos National Labs, for those of you that are not familiar, it's one of the Department of Energy, Nuclear Energy, or Nuclear National Security Administration labs. In relevance to that, a lot of they've found on the plasma physics side of things is that we can use plasmas to sanitize things or get them ready for other industrial processes. So you have these people who are like, I'm just a plasma physics researcher. I just do this or this. And then someone's like, well, if we give you money to do this thing, could you help us on this? Turns out, yes, it has advanced towards fusion, but at the same time, it's like, oh, we can use that immediately. And it's now a billion-dollar industry or something to that effect. I had a thought and I lost it, but I did have a follow-up to that.
That's why Adam's here to
That's
keep
why
us,
I'm
keep
here,
us
because
going.
this is where I say, I said, now tell us that thought.
So it turns out a buddy of mine that we went to high school together and then we lost contact, he reached out to me on LinkedIn. He works for a venture capitalist fund that is specifically in regulated markets where they know the return is not for 20 or 30 years. And he reached out because he had me do some consulting for their organization for nuclear companies. And I was like, why? I asked them flat out, why are you investing in them? You know it's not going to be that long. It's going to be a while. It's like, we know that. All of our stuff is highly regulated. Medical industry, nuclear, other energy, life sciences, where it's like, it's going to take you a while to get through the regulatory process. So those folks do exist. And it's important to have that everywhere.
This is where we come to the end of the session. And this is like final thoughts, right? So this is where I get to ask you final thoughts. And my my preferred one is always, what's the thing you want next for someone watching this, right? Pulling up this video in a week or two. What is the thing you want them to know or do with your team next? Like, what's the thing you need somebody to show up and do? Is it more good fund managers that you don't already know?
So, okay, let me just put out one more public service announcement.
Yes.
April 3rd, look forward, if you know any people in the fund management space, this will be a very conscious effort to invest in socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. This is kind of the intention of that fund manager program. So it's going to be a new generation, new type of manager. So if you know anyone in your network, please do that. I won't rehash anything that we haven't said, but I will make one point, and Adam, I think you brought it up. I think if we have a development need as a state, I would say it's our messaging. I do not think we are getting the comprehensive, organized message out as well as we can. I'm not saying this to be critical. I'm saying we have all of these splendid assets. And I think this is such a great story. And to me, I think the framing of that story is really what's needed. And again, I'm not saying this just, I feel like this is now where you play the battle hymn of the Republic, and you're here I am giving your speech. That's not what I'm trying to do. I really am saying, if you just check off the boxes and you look at kind of the ingredients for a great ecosystem, I think we've got it here.
Right.
And capital is one of the missing pieces. I think we're going to solve that eventually, but I think the messaging piece, believe it or not, systematically, individually, is a big development objective, in my view, that should happen.
That's a good one. Lane?
Thank you.
Don't forget that universities are a good resource. Don't just stick to one or two that you know of off the top of your head. I mean, VCU is a really good example of an institution that we have really, really good technical capabilities, really, really good soft capabilities. Several of the faculty are specifically from industry, and we know how to play the game on both inside and out. That said, I'm not beleaguering you if you go to Virginia Tech or UVA or ODU or those others, but please consider VCU. We'd love to work with y'all in the future. And if you work with VCU, we do a lot with Virginia Union University and Virginia State, which are both historically black colleges and universities. We have a vested interest in bringing everyone along with us. So please consider working with us in the future.
Also a great point.
My thought is plan ahead. Look at what we're doing, and then if you may not be an entrepreneur ready to do it now, but take notes, right? And we have our investment fund runs every couple weeks on a Friday, 9 a.m. to 10:30. Their virtual coffee hour. We do breakout rooms at the end of that. It's the last half hour from our grant team, and you guys are on there, so people can get in a room, virtual room, and chat. The topics are great from an entrepreneurship standpoint, from an investor standpoint, from panels, topics, different things. So they do a great job at doing that. And that's a way to start, I always talk to companies who are doing SBIRs, like, well, stop in on those rooms, because if you're not telling your financing strategy down the road in your SBIR phase one, see if my idea sticks, but you also have to know where I might need what money I will need. Start getting in that virtual room and thinking and learning, becoming investable, right? And we're all there at some point. And the training, like I said, build that foundation. We've got SBIR training on there's a list here. If you're looking at a recording of this, our events page, it's a calendar. Just you see there's a area that you can kind of search by different categories. We got training coming up here in a couple end of April, a National Science Foundation training class. An NIH focused one over at UVA, up in Northern Virginia, we'll have it, a DoD training webinar, 5-hour long training class there. So these are meaningful, focused, in-depth, and it might sound scary. These are all-day classes. We're trying to finally get out there again.
Right.
It's been a while since we had live workshops and stuff. We had to order sandwiches, right? Like, how do you, I gotta order food? Anyhow, so we do that, but plan ahead, and the resources are there. The groups, these groups are all over the state. Entrepreneurship, our ecosystems work with those guys. So get with your local guys, because we don't help people write business plans. There's other resources that do that. There's the ICAP program. There's, SBDC, the PTAT programs to help companies with federal contracting issues. There are all kinds of state resources, and we are doing a better job now than we ever have. I've been at VIPC here for 21 years now, and I think we've been doing a great job over the last 4 or 5 years specifically about learning about the other programs and what they do, and they know what we do. Finally, it's like, oh, I forgot you guys are, well, now we're working on this, and we help fund some of their programs. They're referring, and it starts local, but we're a state organization that we've got. We don't have offices in every city. There's other programs at universities, so there's a lot out there, and we're doing a better job at connecting all the dots than ever. So, awesome.
Real quick, you help with proposals on SBIR in terms of just helping companies figure out what they need on those?
We do
Is that part of it?
the training classes, and then I work with companies to help them.
Not write it, but just show
write
them
it.
how to,
Yeah.
what is expected.
Yep. Well, it goes over the whole, what the SBIR is, but also for that agency, how do you write a proposal for it?
Okay.
We had a budgeting class, a webinar a couple weeks ago about budgeting, writing a budget for an SBIR, an hour and a half long. So.
You haven't mentioned the Phase Zero Award.
And I have a small fund that I manage, and it can help a company actually pay to hire an SBIR consultant. They don't write it for them. They're going to write it and review it. They give you templates and different kind of structure and strategy and mentoring that I can't give because I don't have enough of me to go around. But there's meaningful. We provide about probably about 80 grand a year in that sort of funding. About $4,000 grants.
Yep, which is a key.
Yep.
Key. We try to send as many people to you as we can.
Yep.
All right,
Keep
Sean,
the
you
flow.
get the last word.
I get to wrap it up. So I just I'm just going to kind of lean into what Lane said before, that the ton of good stuff going on at the universities, a ton of good stuff going on in the private sector, and it's days where it's like ne'er the twain shall meet kind of thing, and it's frustrating. We think we should have a big event where we can bring everyone together, and then you start thinking about all of the different stakeholder groups around the state. You're like, this would be like a 1,000 person event, and I nor anyone in the organization wants to do events. Like, we're so busy just doing our thing. But that's a big piece of it too. And just hearing you, kind of do the ad for VCU, do that all the time. Like, because it's just a reminder to the rest of us, like, yeah, like I met so-and-so and so-and-so, and Adam and I were talking earlier, and, that's how things get done, is by connecting people with other people that can help. So that's my wish for the next little while, is to tighten the town and gown connectivity.
Oh, there you go. That's a good one to end on, right? Now you do the battle hymn of the Republic. Well, thank y'all. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming and sharing this wisdom with us, and we hope. Thank you for joining us, and thanks people watching this in the future. All right. Have a good afternoon.